This episode is brought to you by Ardan Labs Education. Sign up today to learn advanced concepts in Go, Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, and more. Visit ardanlabs.com/education for more information.
This is the Ardan Labs podcast, and our special guest today is Jay Conrod. Conrod. Am I saying it right? Conrod?
Conrod.
I almost said it wrong. I was going to say rad because you're rad, dude. And then I went, oh, no, it's Conrod. Do people make that mistake at all? Or I'm just...
People make that mistake all the time. But when I first joined the Go team at Google, Rob Pike made fun of my name. He's like, oh, this guy's named Conrod. He must be an engineer. Because I guess it's like a mechanical part. I'm not really a mechanical guy. But
oh, okay.
It's like, oh, yeah, Rob Pike made fun of my name. That's fun.
No, that's cool, dude. You got called out by Rob. There's nothing wrong with that. And people might think, well, Bill, why don't you just edit this out and start over? Because that's not what we do here. We're raw. We make mistakes and we got a cool story out of it, you see. So if I had said stop and redo it, we wouldn't have gotten the cool Rob Pike story. So now I'm super excited about that. I have been trying to get Jay on the show, I think all year. If you don't realize this, I will record about, I don't know, as many shows as I can in 1 week and then get them in. I call it getting them in the can. And then Kevin behind the scenes does all the editing. And this is my last show for the week. I saved Jay for my last conversation and we got him on. So thank you, Jay, for hanging out with us today.
Glad to be here. Good to close out the week.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. After this, I don't care. It's going to be about 2:30 in the afternoon. I'm going for a drink after this, man. This is my celebration right here.
That sounds like a really good way to close out the week.
Yeah, that's the way you got to do it in Miami. They go out. Give everybody the 2-minute spiel on what Jay is doing today.
Okay. So today I am working at a startup called EngFlow. We do distributed build. So if you're building like a large piece of software, like a web browser or like an operating system for a car or something, you have to build 10,000 files. It takes hours and hours and hours. So we can split that up and build it on a bunch of VMs in the cloud and really speed that up for a whole company, whole team. So it's been a lot of fun. I've been there for about a year, and it's cool to see it grow.
Dude, okay, hold on. I mean, this show is about you, and I got to throw you in the time machine fairly soon so I can talk about like your journey. But like, I have never worked on a project. I guess I've never worked in a big enough company. I've never worked on a project where there's like 10,000 files that need to be compiled or like a whole bunch of project. Like this is mind blowing to me. What you're just saying, that you have these. Is this like an entire company with 1,000 teams that have to build something at the same time to put it into a car or a product?
Yeah. So our company is pretty small. Like our builds are nice and fast, but we work with like Fortune 500s basically, and they're building huge products. So we have a bunch of companies that do build like forks of Chromium, and I'm probably going a little bit out of order here, but like earlier in my career, I worked on a Chromium fork for Android.
Yeah, you're not allowed to talk about that just yet.
Okay.
So
I won't spoil it then.
Yeah, but I mean, you can delicately talk, but I don't want you to. Actually, no, don't talk about that at all. Somebody listening to this understands the scale that you're talking about and how long that takes.
I'll just say that I'm working on a product that I really wish I had 10 years ago. And there's something really satisfying about that.
I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is why, at some level, why Go exists, right? The whole, I had to wait really long to get this build done before I could see if my bug fix worked, sort of thing. So I guess that sort of scale of build and being able to run it, find the pieces that you can do concurrently or in parallel, just to speed things up.
Yeah, Go is really good at that. And I've heard like from the people who got together and decided to create Go, like slow build times in C++ was the main reason they were doing it. Like they got around a whiteboard while they were waiting for a 45-minute build. And they were like, how can we speed this up?
Yeah, it's mind blowing, dude. And now you're working on some of the same problems. Okay, we're going to get back to that because I got 1,000 questions and I can't ask them right now. So two more questions we got to ask as I put you in the time machine. The first one is, what year did you graduate high school and where were you at the time? Let's start with that one first. So
Okay. This is going way back in the time machine. I'm afraid I'm going to date myself a bit, but I graduated high school in 2004.
come on,
So it's
you're
almost my 20th anniversary next year.
20
I was
years.
in New Mexico at the time. It was kind of a weird place, southern New Mexico.
New Mexico. That is one state that I have not stepped into, not even from a flight transfer or nothing.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild place. I grew up next to White Sands National Park. It was a national monument in those days. I was a Park Service brat, so we lived in a few different places. So like it's this big like gypsum sand dune. It's really beautiful country, but it's in the middle of a missile range. So there's like a lot of military stuff going overhead. We actually had like one of those F-117 Nighthawks, like the old time stealth airplanes, like fly over the high school graduation, like as a stunt. It's kind of fun.
So if you were out in the desert, you would have seen the military fences that say like don't no trespassing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, when I see those fences, and we have some of those in Miami because of Southern Command and nuclear power plants and stuff. But when I see those, my stomach hurts. I'm just like, don't want to be any. I don't even want to be on the fence. Forget about anywhere near. Like, you know what I'm saying?
My first job out of high school, I worked at this is a fun way to say it. I worked at a laser weapons test facility, which sounds really cool.
Okay, you can't tell me about this. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. But
All right,
I am
man.
now even more excited than I ever was to hear this story. Okay, so 2004, graduate high school. You're in New Mexico, which is wild to me. I don't want you to feel old because I graduated high school in 1987. So now you can feel better about yourself. Okay. Okay, and then so one of my favorite questions to ask engineers: clear your mind, clear your mind, make it blank, empty it out. First memory you have of working on a computer, banging on the keyboard.
I think that like the first time I was doing anything with programming or like in general, like on a computer.
Just not even program. Very first memory that you just had your hands on a keyboard. I don't want to talk about like gaming consoles, but like a keyboard. Could have been anything.
I think it was about 4 years old. My parents like got our first like desktop computer. It's like an old time DOS machine. So I remember that they had like a few little like educational games on there for me. I remember just like absolutely being fascinated by it. Was like really compelled to be in front of the computer all the time. I think like
Dude, there's no way you have that memory. You are 4 years old and you have that vivid memory. You don't think it's a story that somebody told you and you have it. This is a vivid memory.
4 years old, yeah, for sure. I remember I got up really early one morning because I just wanted to like play on the computer, and I started, pressing buttons in Windows 3.1, and I couldn't really read yet. And at some point, like all the fonts changed to like a cursive font, and I really couldn't read, and I ended up like deleting most of the operating system. So my parents had a fun time sorting that out.
They can't they can't punish you. You're 4 years old. I mean, it's
Yeah.
your fault. That's dude, that is absolutely like I have one memory of kindergarten, but it's because it was a trauma. Gave us the milk for lunch and it was sour. And I remember drinking it, throwing up, and never drinking milk again in the raw. Like I cannot pour a glass of milk. I'm gonna be 54 years old, Jay, and I cannot pour a straight glass of milk and drink it because of what happened to me, I guess, when I was 5 years old. That like
There's something about like food poisoning that really like taints that food forever for you. Like the memory really sticks.
yeah, it's wild. But to have that memory is at 4 is absolutely awesome. Okay. So 2004. Okay, you're almost 20. Okay, so let's jump in the time machine a little bit because I always like to get a sense of who my guest was sort of during those high school years, right? So, I mean, you had a computer early on in the house. You're talking when you were 4 years old. So I imagine that after that experience, you just continued that became part of your life, I imagine, even from an early age, working on that computer. But let's just say prior to high school for a second, were you at some level already sort of programming on that computer, maybe prior to high school? And were your parents or anybody that you knew at the time sort of an influence on that?
I didn't really have anyone in my family that did like any kind of software work, nor did I like know anyone growing up who did. I did have like a family member like gift me a book on Basic, and so back in those days, like Basic was this like kind of mini programming language installed on all the DOS machines. So this was like pre-internet, so I got my feet wet with that. I think it was like 8 or 9 at the time, but I didn't really have anywhere to go with it. So I kind of came back to it later once once the internet became more widespread in the mid '90s. So I got into, I think it was like 12 or 13, like HTML and CSS. It was into like GeoCities, all the website building stuff back then. I started wanting to get more like dynamic websites, and so I actually taught myself Perl. Um, Perl is like I think there's some famous Dijkstra quote about Basic, like he didn't want to teach anyone who had ever learned Basic because it like mutilated their mind with all the go-tos and stuff.
I
I
never,
don't know if
I've
Perl
never
was
found that
much
quote.
better. like
Why
like
not
Perl for
PHP?
sure
Do
is.
you remember? Do you remember why Perl versus PHP at that time? PHP had to
I
be
don't
around
know if I
already.
was aware of PHP yet. Like
Uh,
Perl was just like the thing that I could find a book on.
I never programmed in Perl, but Damien Grisky worked at Booking.com, which the whole site I think is written in Perl. My
Wow.
first time I even really saw it. And the funny thing people have always told me about Perl was that you could write almost like English. You can write a story in it in a sense, and it would still be like executable code. That's I've never played in it, but you kind of understand what I'm saying.
It's got like all these symbols and shorthands, and it can be completely unreadable if you really use them. Like you can mash like almost any combination of like hold shift and like type all the number keys, like all those symbols, and it'll be valid Perl.
Man, yeah, I've never who's the guy that designed Perl? What's his name again? Larry Wall is the creator of Perl. You want to hear a funny Larry Wall story?
I
Oh
do.
my God, it's like 2015 and 16. I'm at like an O'Reilly conference in Portland, Oregon, and I'm at one of the after parties, and I see Brian Lyles. I hadn't seen Brian in I don't know for a while, and Brian Lyles was talking to somebody, some like Willie Nelson hippie looking dude. And I'm trying to be patient and waiting for Brian to finish his conversation, but it's like 20 minutes in and it's not like ending. And I have to leave. And I want to say hi to Brian. So I just give up. I walk over to Brian and this again, Willie Nelson hippie looking dude. And I say, I'm sorry for interrupting your conversation. But I haven't seen Brian in a while, and I have to leave, and I just wanted to say hi to him. And Brian's looking at me, and the guy's like, "Oh yeah, no problem. We're gonna finish up right now." And I apologized again, and I walked off a little bit. And Brian comes over and he says, "Do you know who you just interrupted?" I said, "Dude, I have no idea." He goes, "That was Larry Wall," and I said, "Okay, who's Larry Wall?" Right? And then he tells me who he is, and I'm like, oh, maybe that wasn't so good. I guess that's why his wife was really pissed off when I did that. And he said, like, you have no idea.
Oh,
I was
oh
probably the only
no.
person at that party who didn't know who he was because I'm not in that community. I'm not in that programming language. Like, what do I know? Right.
Yeah.
That's, which I always use that story to say that, sometimes we label people as celebrities, but they're like just celebrities maybe in this super tiny little world that you know, and outside of it, you're Larry Wall, and I don't know who you are. So
Yeah, for sure we get that way in the Go community. Like there are a lot of like people who I would consider to be like really famous and really really amazing people working on Go. And I mean within the conference circuit, they're all very well known. But I mean if I go to a Java conference, for example, they're going to have the equivalent people and I'll have no idea.
Exactly. You have no idea who you're talking to. And I think that's cool. Okay. So you were learning Perl, you're doing some programming. What kind of websites were you building? Was there anything that you were publishing out there? Anything fun?
Nothing substantial. I was really into StarCraft at the time, so I think I made like a little StarCraft like group website for people to play together and kind of like uh, get ranked against each other, find matches, that kind of thing.
Talk to me about high school, because this is when you really start to formulate more about who you are, and you're gaining some independence so you can do the things you want to do. Are you taking any sort of computer classes in high school? Are you doing other things like sports, art, music? Like, what else are you into?
My parents wanted me to be really well rounded. I think like I tend to really hyper focus on things, which is a bit of a bad habit. I think if I were left to my own devices, I'd be in front of the computer 24 hours a day. So they they limited my time with that in favor of other activities, which like in hindsight I really appreciate. So I was doing competitive swimming. I was in the pool for at some point like 4 hours a day, getting up very early. I used to swim 10,000 meters a day during the summers.
Dude, first of all, I think I mean, swimming is one of the hardest. You want to stay in shape and keep your body parts in place. Swimming, I guess maybe other than your shoulder, because you're doing that, but yeah, bro, physical. You must have been like you must have been fit, man. I lived in
Yeah,
college with
it's amazing exercise.
my roommate was a swimmer, and the back that he formed when they were like trying to loosen up, he'd throw his arms up and back, and they'd hit the back of his I don't know, the sides of his body. He looked like a fish, right? Because they're like, he was like this, and he could throw his arms back and hit it, and all you hear is slap, 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 slap. And only swimmers, the only people that had bodies like that were swimmers.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
You must have been doing that.
It was intense, and like in New Mexico, it was like also really nice to be in the pool because it's really hot during summer. The other thing I was into was marching band.
Let me ask the swimming side, since you were swimming, especially competitively. Were you winning this? Did it end up really just being an activity, or were you at a point where you could actually win and compete?
I think back then it was more of an activity. So it's interesting to see like I'm apologize for skipping ahead, but I do karate now, and I see like a huge difference between like the kids who are doing it, and like the teenagers and the adults. There's like some age where people get into things and they really start like it changes from an activity to like something really self-directed. You start like being aware of the things that you need to do to improve, and you start like doing that focused practice, and really taking off. And so swimming back then for me was just an activity. It was just something I went to do for a few hours a day that was kind of fun, but I wasn't really competitive. I was never actually all that good at it. Like it was good exercise and it was all right, but I wasn't like winning like state level medals or anything like that.
Yeah, you're not at a level where now they're talking about Olympics for
Yeah,
swimming.
nowhere close to that.
No, no, yeah, that's fair. I like asking the question because, and I talked about this in my last podcast too, right? There's a level of being an athlete where to me, there's a really thick line. Like everybody's average, and then you have what I call a freak, right? The Michael Jordans of the world, name it, the Olympic swimmer, Phelps. They're just freaks, man. Their bodies and just right. Like there's not a lot of people like that on the planet, I guess is what I'm saying. So I just like asking because maybe you're one of these athletic freaks, and I love meeting people like this because it's just so fascinating to be at that level in anything.
There's like I think there's like kind of a natural like body type component to it, but there's also like really a mindset. Like are you going to do like the directed learning and directed practice? One of my favorite books is the Art of Learning, and the author of that, who I forget his name, but he goes from being like a chess grandmaster to being like one of the champions of Tai Chi, like Tai Chi combat, like two completely different disciplines, but he becomes like really incredibly good at both. and it's like kind of the same like mental skills more than anything else. Like I'm sure he could go on to do like a third or fourth thing and be a world champion at it.
That's Josh Waitskin, something like
Yeah, I
that.
think that's right.
Wow. So
Yeah,
so he's
amazing
learned
book.
how to, but I still think you need to have an innate sort of ability for that too. Like you said, your body or your mind. But that's an instrument. We're going to put that book in the show notes. Now, wait, you said you were in marching band too. So what instrument did you play?
So I initially played oboe. I switched over to flute when we started marching because you can't march with a double reed instrument. Flute was kind of a natural transition. It's in the same key, and most of the fingerings are the same, so it was really easy to pick up.
And it's lighter, man. When you have to walk around, you're not walking around with a tuba. You're walking around with a
Yeah,
flute.
for
I mean,
sure.
that's super smart. My dad always told me a story. He was a sax player, and he could play anything with a reed, right? You know, the clarinets. But he was a sax player, and he was playing the bass sax, I think, for the Marine band. And he got so tired of carrying the sax around that he said he spent weeks in one of the bathrooms learning the piccolo, the smallest flute that was in the band. And he spent hours learning it, and he tried out for it and he got it. And all because he didn't want to be carrying that saxophone
A
around
really good call.
everywhere.
Those are heavy.
So the flute is cool. I hope you still play because the flute's a cool instrument. Ron Burgundy, I think, bring it back to life, dude. Yeah,
Yeah,
in that
Mr.
one
San
scene.
Diego.
So yeah, I kind of have a picture of you now in a San Francisco bar playing flute.
Yeah, sadly, I haven't touched it since like late high school, early college. I miss it, but
Why don't
it's
you just go buy one, man? I bet you in like 2 weeks you'll be back to form.
I hope to get back into it someday. I still have my old flute. It's a good instrument.
Okay, but what's holding you back? Like you said, what someday? Like what's holding you back after this call to just take 10 minutes and pull it out of the closet and start jamming on it?
I think it's one of those things where you have to put a lot of time and energy into it like continuously in order to really enjoy it. So it's just too big of a commitment right now. Like having a lot of other stuff going on. Like I'm kind of like choosing where to spend my energy. So I hope to do that someday, but not today. Too many other things.
All right, that's fair. You're not ready to put any attention to that, and you don't want to pull it out because you just don't want to be distracted with all the other things that are going on.
Yeah,
All
you
right,
really have to
that's
put a
fair.
lot of time and energy into it to make it worthwhile.
The equivalent that I have with that is golf. I played a lot of golf in high school, not competitive, on my own, and I never got that. I never got better than say bogey, like one over par golf, which was fine for me because I could play with anybody and not slow them down. But I got to a point where I couldn't get any better, and I wasn't willing to put more time, money, and effort into it, which is what's going to be required to start playing par, at least for me, right? I didn't have the full natural. So I stopped playing. I love watching it on TV. I'm maybe one of those weird people that love watching on TV because I know how difficult the game is. But I literally stopped playing because I just felt like I had hit that point and I wasn't gonna get better. And I don't know why it bothered me. Like I lost the love of being out playing. It's weird.
I think you have to be really self-aware of that kind of thing of like how far do you want to take it? How much do you enjoy it? And like the opportunity cost of like do you want to be good at another sport too? Like do you want to try another activity? Like are there other things to learn? Like there's so many things out there. I during the pandemic I started painting. Like I always wanted to like learn how to draw and paint. So I started like watercolor painting and I found that enormously relaxing. Again, like I didn't put a huge amount of time into it, and I didn't really get good at it, but like I enjoyed the act of it.
Oh, we're gonna get back to that. I want to get back to that because I think that's another sort of skill, and people will argue with me. Unpopular opinion. I think art, like drawing, is a skill that you have to have some innate ability for. If you do, you can improve. But if you don't, I don't think it can be learned. I cannot draw to save my life, and I've tried books, and I've tried classes, and my sister's amazing, and I'm not. I just feel like this is something you just can't be taught. You either have to have some skill or not.
I think you can get a long ways from zero. Like I don't consider myself to have any innate ability whatsoever at art. Like it was something that actually like repelled me when I was in high school. It was like I was more attracted to the technical side of things, like programming, engineering, and I thought, those are two different worlds, and I can't be in both. So like when I finally tried it out, like of course, I mean, the first time you try anything, you're no good, but I watched a lot of online tutorials and kept practicing. And I mean, I'm no expert, but I turned out a couple of pieces that I really enjoyed. I think you can pick up and be decent about almost anything.
Dude, our conversation is drawing so many funny memories. So in my first startup, I worked. One of my partners was a gentleman who worked in the mining industry. He literally was like the CEO of a $5 billion mining company. Just to give you a sense of who this person was. Okay, so he's retired. We're doing this startup, and his wife comes home with a painting. His son is about to have a baby. She comes home with this painting for the nursery, and he says to her, like, "How much did you pay for that?" She says, "I paid like $300 or $400." He goes, "What? I could have painted that." So now his wife and his son are laughing at him. "You couldn't paint this thing, Dad. There's just come on, Dad, stop." He's like, $300. I could have. So he goes to the store, he buys the canvas, he buys the paints, he buys the whole thing, sets up in his office, and he doesn't try to duplicate that, but he starts to paint like the, and he comes out with his first painting, and everybody's mouth just like hits the floor and drops. And he's like, "I told you I could paint this thing."
Wow, he'd never
It's like,
painted before that.
no, no, no. And everybody was just like, Okay, I guess you were right." It's wild. It was wild, man. It was wild. It was so funny, especially when he told the story and everybody had to agree. Okay, I need to get back here. So, talk to me about high school because now I know you're swimming, you're doing you're well rounded in terms of you're not dedicating your time to one thing, but you're going to be graduating. So, I'm really curious where your head is in terms of graduation. Do you want to stay in New Mexico? Are you looking to leave? What kind of degree are you thinking about? Maybe you're not even thinking about university at all, dude. Like, shouldn't assume that. So, what's going on as you're now needing to make that decision your senior year?
Yeah, I was really like academically university focused in my last couple of years of high school, like very much like trying to get into a top college. Um, so I actually didn't apply to many. I applied to Caltech, where I got in and eventually went. And like my other option was New Mexico State, which is for electrical engineering a really good school. So my choice was kind of like, do I go with electrical engineering, like chip design, low level programming, like that field also really attracts me. Or do I go to Caltech? Do I go to this like harder, more prestigious school? And so I I eventually chose Caltech, but it was a close decision. There was something like kind of culturally that attracted me there. They had a history of like all the famous physicists, like Feynman. I really enjoy like Richard Feynman's books. So he's like very famously associated with the university, and just the student life seemed really good to me there.
I mean, Caltech is not an easy school to get into. So, were you concerned at all they were going to say no, or you felt like you had done everything that you needed to do to get into that school?
I was definitely worried that they would say no, um, but they had a. I think the reason I applied there and I didn't apply to too many other schools, like I would have loved to go to like Stanford or Berkeley or like Cornell or those. But I was really concerned about the cost because my dad was a government employee that kind of middle class, like not able to afford Ivy League type student debts. So Caltech had a great financial aid program at the time, and so it ended up being pretty affordable for us. New Mexico State would have been a great option too. So that wasn't like kind of distant backup safety option. That was like if I don't get into the school that I really want to go, then this is like a fantastic choice too. And like having both acceptances in front of me, it was still a difficult decision.
Right, and one lets you leave the state and sort of get away, and the other has you staying, I guess, essentially home. And you said before your parents, they were park rangers. They worked, I guess, they worked outside, right, in the parks and all that. That's a really super cool job. I think it's. Did you think that was a cool job, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. So my dad spent his entire career in the Park Service. My mom was there in the early days, but she had a bunch of other jobs in addition to that. My dad worked on these kind of like environmental review projects in the park. So like um, understanding environmental impact for construction projects and that kind of thing. But he also got out there occasionally, and one of the things that we had in New Mexico is these animals. They're called oryx. They're like African gazelles. They're like these antelope type things with
Oh,
long horns. And they were brought there for hunting, but they've bred and they're all over the Missile Range and all over the national park. So they wanted to get those out. He actually supervised like a project to go around in helicopters and like dart them to tranquilize them and then like airlift them outside of the park, outside of the fence, so they couldn't get back in. So they like humanely removed like 150 animals that way. It's kind of neat.
into a new habitat, obviously.
Yeah. Outside into
Yeah,
the
these
Missile
are big
Range, which
animals.
they're still there today.
Oh my god, dude. Actually, were you doing any work while you were in high school? Did you have any sort of jobs or internships in high school?
I volunteered at a theater. I was like theater tech. So I ran like lights and sound and special effects, that kind of thing. I worked very briefly as like a telemarketer. That was the worst job ever.
Inbound or outbound calling?
Oh,
Oh my
outbound
god.
cold calls, like the bad kind.
Oh no, dude. Oh my god, dude. That's rough.
Yeah, I'm
That's
definitely
rough.
going to hell for that.
Oh my god, just people being angry that they even picked up the phone. Nobody realizes that like you're doing this job not whatever. You're doing this job and you don't want to be there, and now somebody just lets loose. Wow. Dude, okay. All right. Very cool. All right. So you go into Caltech, you pack your bags, you get over there. Is it a computer science degree? Is it kind of an open degree? You don't know what you want to do yet? How does that work over there?
So I was still kind of split between computer science and electrical engineering. They actually have like the most like the first year and a half or so is just core classes, so you don't have to decide for a long time. I did take an electrical engineering class fairly early on. The title was Introduction to Microprocessor Architecture, but the students jokingly called it microprocessor archaeology because it was on these like old 16-bit microcontrollers. And so it's like the first class, and it's like all soldering and programming in like 16-bit DOS assembly, and there's like no support. Like it's a weeder class, they want to make it as hard as possible so that people drop. And I dropped. Like I put like 20 hours a week into this class for 4 weeks, and I was like, okay, no, can't do it. Like I soldered 500 joints on this board, and it just didn't work, and I couldn't figure out why. So computer science it was. I think I was more interested in computer science anyway, but the choice was made for me.
I'm fascinated by electrical engineering and all that, but I like the idea of software that if something breaks, you can fix it.
Yes.
And um, I really hate. I'm okay working around the house. I can patch walls now, but I always get like, if I do this wrong, I'm gonna have a hole, and I can't necessarily patch it the way it looks like it's not brand new anymore. And I feel like hardware is somewhat similar. You never have that hole in the wall with software. I
Yeah,
guess is
you
what I'm
can
saying.
always undo mistakes. Like you can always reboot or get reset or
You
something.
can always undo. I look at the wall and I'm like, I want the undo button, please. I imagine you go to that school with a certain level of expectation that it's going to be challenging. Was your expectation right on, under, or over?
I knew it was going to be challenging, but it was way more challenging than I thought, to be honest. Like I remember like even from the beginning going in that we had these like math placement tests, and I had done like up through multivariable calculus in high school and like kind of dual credit like state college classes. So they have this placement test for math, and I got like a really low score on it. Like I passed, but they're like, maybe you should take the remedial class. Like it's an option, consider it. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take Math 1A. I'm gonna start at the beginning. Yeah, it was super hard. Like I remember the first problem set. It was like just like prove these things about math I had no idea how to do. Like prove the square root of 2 is not a rational number. That was a question on the first problem set. And there's like this complicated proof around, P's and Q's and dividing things.
And you can't look anything up.
One of the things I really liked about it though was Caltech was a very collaborative environment. Like people were encouraged to work together on almost every problem set, and tests were generally like take home, open book. Like tests were pretty much the only thing that you did alone, and the professors trusted the students not to cheat on those. So like that at least.
But you had open book, was real world sort of problem solving then.
Yeah.
Very hard problems.
Very difficult.
Like, right. Very hard problems. You're not just going to find the answer on a search, but I like that. But did you ever consider like this was too much and I don't want to be here anymore? Or did that get you more sort of focused to say, I'm not going to be defeated?
I definitely thought about leaving in the early days. Like I really struggled with a lot of the like advanced physics and chemistry, especially like organic chemistry was really difficult. Um, I had a fantastic math and physics tutor who she is now my wife. So we met in school and just stayed together and married later.
Oh dude, boy, I could have a whole show just on that, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really true. Like she kept me in school. I don't think I would have made it academically if it weren't for her help and encouragement.
She took pity on you and said, this kid needs a lot of help. I better give him some extra tutoring. You see, that worked out, man. Needing help actually worked out. You got to ask for help, everybody, and good things happen.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome, dude. That right there is one of my favorite stories all week right there. That's great. Oh God, I have so many questions there, but we're not going to go there. Okay. So did you have any internships or did you work at all while you were at Caltech? Anything still related to computer science, maybe?
Yeah, I did. I got really interested in. I was interested in two topics: graphics and compilers. I had like kind of in late high school, I had gotten into like game programming. I think I didn't want to do it as a career because I've heard like game development as a field is like really kind of a bad work environment. But I really enjoyed the graphics aspect of it. So I took a bunch of graphics classes at Caltech, and so I interned at NVIDIA. I was there twice actually. And so the first time I was there working on like kernel drivers for old cards, and I was for some reason surprised to learn that people at NVIDIA don't actually do much graphics work. It's all like kernel driver programming. Which, I mean, if I had thought about it for a second, would have made perfect sense. But I found like I don't really want to do that type of work. But I came back the second year and worked on the like one of the compilers for CUDA and like GLSL and all those shader languages. So that was a lot of fun. That was much more aligned with what I wanted to do.
Okay, this is super interesting to me. We're staying here in college for a second. What attracted you to compilers and sort of compiler design and all that? Because I find it to be a really interesting, it's a really unique sort of programming skills, right? I just find it interesting. What about that is appeal to you?
I think what fascinates me about it is that you're creating this big abstraction out of almost nothing. Like you're taking like human written code and you're turning that into machine code, and like before you start reading about compilers and you realize like, oh, there are these like kind of simple transformations that do it. It feels very magical, and so you're creating that abstraction for people. Like you're creating this big thing out of almost nothing. Compilers generally don't have thousands of libraries like we do with uh, with all kinds of apps. So you can really just focus on the problem without anything else around, and like create this big, really useful thing. That really appealed to me. You're going down like levels from very high level to very low level. I think it's really cool.
Now, I don't know much at all about compilers, but I always hear there's a front end, there's a back end, maybe there's something in the middle. Were you more attracted to the front end or the back end of the compilers or the whole thing?
Whole thing really. I think I was interested in language design. Uh, so the front end is like parsers, lexers, and that kind of thing. I think that actually, like now I'm a bit more experienced with it. That actually tends to be nearly the same code for every compiler. You're certainly using the same approaches, just the syntax, the underlying syntax that you're parsing is a bit different. Perhaps there are some differences in the type system. I later found that I really enjoyed working on the back end too. Like I really enjoyed working with assembly code, with kind of like low level runtime hacks. So I'm skipping it ahead of it. I got to do a lot of that at Qualcomm. I was working on a web browser. What I was actually working on there was a fork of V8, the JavaScript engine. So we're compiling things like at runtime, like just in time compilation, and like optimizing and patching running code. Um, that was just super interesting, super exciting for me.
You're going to graduate from Caltech, and do you decide that you want to continue your education, go after the graduate degree or PhD, or do you decide you want to get into industry?
So I decided to go for masters at UCSD for two reasons. One, my girlfriend at the time, we're married now, but she went to UCSD for her PhD. So I followed a year later. I was a year behind her. So I wanted to move down to San Diego. The other, like they had a really good like CS master's graduate program there. The other reason is I graduated college in 2008, which is pretty much the worst time to look for an industry job ever.
Yeah, it was
Maybe
not a good
2009 was
time.
worse, but good time to go to graduate
Yeah.
school.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, everything was falling apart because of the mortgage crisis. Coming out of school wasn't a good time to find a job. So you both moved to San Diego. She's going to work on her. What was her PhD? I'm assuming she got the PhD. So what did she get what was she working her PhD in?
She was a physicist. She was looking at she was working with lasers and cryogens, like very low temperature physics. She was working with excitons, like electrons and holes and the interaction between them. I it's more complicated than I can understand, but it sounded really cool.
Sounds very academic too. Like, is she working in industry now doing these same sorts of things?
She became a software engineer later on. So like the career path for a physicist is kind of a difficult one. And it like she found that she actually really didn't like lab work very much. So she ended up like finishing her PhD and doing a postdoc in New York. That was what brought us to New York City actually, and eventually she decided to make the jump over to software. So a lot of those like PhD data analysis skills in physics translate pretty well over to data analysis and machine learning in CS.
Daniel Whitenack, who's all AI ML, like he's the guy I go to. He had a degree in physics too, and he's one of the best software developers um, that I know. It translates really well. In fact, I think sometimes having the other discipline and moving to programming can really strengthen you as a programmer as opposed to just having that one discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that. I mean, we talk a lot about the importance of diversity, and when we talk about that, we're usually talking about we need more women, we need people of different races, like those type of like personal attributes. I think that's really important, but another really important aspect is like what is your like kind of background? Like, are you coming from like different education path? Like you have different experience in different areas. Like that kind of diversity really adds a lot to a team too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because the other engineering disciplines are you're learning how to do problem solving in really cool, unique ways. and it totally translates over. And I'm not shocked that she's right. What is her programming language of choice right now? Is she writing C level code? Is it Go? Is it Python? Like, what is she doing?
She's mostly doing Python. She works in like database infrastructure now, so she got kind of like deeper into the stack.
So you go to San Diego, you're going to get your master's degree. The job market's not great. That's like a 2 year sort of program, I imagine. But you have to work at that point too, right? You got to support yourself. So you must be working somewhat, or you had enough funds to just go to school heads down full time.
So I actually got paid for a while as like a graduate research assistant. So I was basically working on research projects as if I were a PhD student. Um, so that was interesting too. We were working on a compiler for saving power. Like the idea was that you would take a server program like a Apache HTTP server, and you would strip out all the parts of it that you don't really need, and then run like the minimized program on kind of a secondary low power computer. We actually had this little ARM thing that would plug into an Ethernet port.
Yeah, but when you say you don't need, you're talking about like, I don't even know what you're talking about. How do you know what code you need? Like high level, give me 30 seconds, okay? What is code that is somebody wrote that we didn't need?
So we could actually build the server with this dynamic instrumentation that would just like record all of the instructions that got executed. And so you do that for a while with some example workflow. So say you have a basic web server, you're mostly serving static files, but sometimes you need to like proxy to some other server or do something a little bit unusual, like fire up some kind of corner case code path. So the common case path would be compiled into this like low power executable that would run on another computer. And then when it kind of went off the rails, it would bail out and go to the normal high powered server and like just context switch onto a different machine, basically.
Would you consider that idea profile guided?
Yeah, it's very much in that line. Like you're using kind of the same techniques to like record which code gets executed. You're doing different stuff with that information though.
Okay, that's super interesting, man. So you got to work on that stuff. You got paid to go to school. You do. How many years are you there in San Diego then?
I was in graduate school for about a year and a half, I guess, and then I switched into industry shortly after that. I
There
worked
in San
at
Diego.
Yeah, still in San Diego. So I worked at Qualcomm in 2010, and it was right at the beginning of like the 4G smartphone boom. So my first job there was actually working on an operating system for feature phones, like those old Motorola Razr flip phone type things.
Yeah.
So that was like a doomed project because Android was eating everyone's lunch. But it was interesting to see like kind of a low level operating system. We didn't have virtual memory on those, so everything is in 64 megabytes of physical RAM, like shared address space. One of my best debugging stories is we had like a set of benchmarks that was running, and it would crash randomly on memory allocation or deallocation. So like, okay, probably heap corruption. It would crash in a different place every time, so it was hard to figure out what was causing this. It turned out eventually it was like some other program that was running on the phone that had overflowed its stack. And every stack was allocated on the heap, and the heap was shared among all of the programs on the phone. So it was corrupting the heap. I spent like 3 weeks debugging this. I was like a junior engineer. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to fire me. And I finally figured it out and just like doubled the stack size for this one app. And it's like a change in a config file and the problem is done.
I know, but it was a side effect of something outside of that. So how did you even catch that?
I don't remember how I caught it. I think I looked at every single thing that it could possibly be and just exhausted all other options.
Dude, man, when my first job in Miami in the mid 90s, there was this program it was basically a patient chart before there were really patient charts. I think it was written in DBase. Anyway, there was some update to some driver and it kept crashing the app. This is DOS level days. And I was beyond anything I could do. We hired this guy from Ireland who came in. He sat with me for 3 days, and we basically ran each instruction by hand when this program started. Luckily, it would blow up on startup at some point. For 3 days, ran that next one, ran that next one, that, and we finally found an instruction that was corrupting memory somewhere that was causing the app. And I don't we changed the binary somehow and added a bunch of no ops somewhere. He did something to this binary to cause that memory corruption to go somewhere else. And we were able to run this thing again. Talk about stress, man. I never would have been able to do that without the expertise of this human being. It was mind blowing. That so I get that's like I can feel you maybe going through that same sort of tediousness and trying to figure out where's the instruction that's causing all the pain.
Yeah, sometimes it's buried really deep in there. It's really hard to find.
But that's awesome. You must have felt like the relief, the entire team's relief. Now that wasn't an app that you controlled, so you just increased their stack size. You couldn't go in and, or was that an app you could rebuild with a larger stack?
Yeah, it was one of our apps. It was one of the built-in apps on the phone.
How long were you there at Qualcomm and up until the time that your wife had graduated her PhD?
Yeah, so she finished her PhD in near the end of 2014. So I was there for 4.5 years. I worked on this like feature phone thing for about a year before they spun down the department. I remember it's like Monday morning, like mandatory all hands meeting, like scheduled on everyone's calendar with like 1 hour notice. Like, not a good thing. When that happens, it's
No,
not good news.
no, no,
Can't
no, no.
possibly be good news. I spent the rest of the day like polishing up my resume and like starting to learn Android and doing tutorials on that. I ended up like switching into another part of the company where they were building a web browser for Android. So before Chrome, all of the phones had these little, www or like internet web browsers, these kind of white label things. So we had forked Chromium and made a bunch of modifications to it, and then the phone manufacturers would take that and like make it their own browser, basically. So we had teams doing graphics work. The team I was on did JavaScript optimization, mostly targeting our processor, but like really any kind of hacks that we could think of to make it go faster would definitely be fair game. So that was a lot of fun.
No, dude, you're doing this really sort of low level computing optimization stuff right from the beginning. I mean, you're a big asset to this company. I mean, I can't imagine there's a lot of people walking around even in 2010, 11, 12 with that skill set. So that's really wild. But I imagine your biggest problem was memory consumption on these phones with something like Chromium.
Yeah, so Android was a little bit more loose with memory consumption. It was definitely a concern though. I remember especially like we put together demos in the early days of WebGL. So like you can run like 3D code in the web browser, and we enabled that on phones pretty early. But those would definitely use a ton of memory when they loaded in big models and stuff. Like we'd actually have multiple instances of the browser running, and that could exhaust not only physical memory but virtual memory too, because they were all 30-bit, 32-bit in those days.
How is all that kind of working in the browser anyway, right? Because you're at the end of the day, all that stuff gets transpiled at runtime into some machine code that's getting executed, or there's just a big is it just that there's a big interpreter there, I guess, and that just is executing instructions?
No, it does get compiled into machine code like pretty much on the fly. In those days, all JavaScript code in Chromium got compiled into machine code. There was no interpreter. They'd have a bunch of stuff in the compiled machine code that would change itself dynamically depending on like the types of data that it came across. So you'd have these little inline caches that would say like, okay, this is always an integer. I'm going to optimize it for that, or this is always a string. So one of my major pieces of work there was to like cache and save like the more highly optimized code so that we could reuse it across page loads. That made a huge difference.
This has to be a C-based code base, right? Or C++.
Yeah, all C++ and assembly.
My brain thinks that this had to be a really hard code base to build a mental model around and to work on and not create more bugs in the process.
It it took a while for me to grasp it, for sure. um, the funny thing is, like, the thing that really made me understand it is I read a bunch of like PhD papers and a thesis by like Urs Holtz. He's like the head of Google something or other. He's like an SVP, one of the really early Google employees. But he was a PhD student way back when, and he actually developed a lot of the techniques for making like JavaScript web browsers work now. I mean, long before JavaScript, but in interesting papers.
So what happens? So you're working on these projects. She finishes her PhD. She wants to go to New York to do a postdoc, and you're like, whatever, it's all good. We'll go to New York.
I thought it was a great opportunity. Um, I think we were always planning to like go somewhere unspecified, like who knows where. After her PhD, she got a postdoc offer at Columbia, and so I went to go interview at Google there and got the job. So it seemed like a fantastic opportunity for us both. So we moved there at the end of 2014.
Okay, so two things there. I'm okay. I'm going to throw a guess out there and just tell me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing Google because you got all this Chromium experience and you want to continue to be working on that browser at some level.
I wasn't like committed to working on like browsers specifically, but it felt like everything that I had been doing really like came from Google, and I wanted to like kind of go to the source. So like all the Chromium stuff, all the Android stuff, like this seemed to be the center of the software universe back then, at least from the narrow perspective that I had. I also had like a lot of friends from college who worked there, so I was kind of looking forward to having some friendly faces there too.
I mean, it's very challenging to get a job there. So, what did you feel your chances were from the moment you applied? And then how long did it take you from the time you applied to?
I thought I had a pretty decent chance. I think I was decently well qualified. Like not a slam dunk by any means. I think it was about a month between the time that I applied and the time that like the interview happened, and we sorted out all the negotiations and everything.
I mean, that's amazing. I don't know what it was like in 2014, but nothing takes a month anymore over
No, I've
there.
I've heard of.
So,
I mean, it depends if they really want to hire or not, right? Because like now they're just like hiring freezes everywhere, and it takes forever, and you get stuck in limbo. But at the time, they were growing the New York site from like 6,000 people to 10,000. I mean, it was at the time when like all of the FANG companies were growing at like 20%, 40% a year. Just like a time of fantastic growth, like really good time to get in, at least as far as like getting hired or not is concerned.
so that's brilliant. So you now have a job at Google, which is absolutely awesome. Your wife's going to go do some schooling in Columbia. That's awesome. And you've never been on the East Coast, really. And New York is an amazing city. So it all just sort of lining up there. What team did you end up getting on at Google to start?
Yeah. So my first time on the East Coast was actually, or my first time visiting New York was my Google interview. I'd never been to New York City before. I ended up joining Google Docs. That was the team that was hiring the most at the time. So back then you would like after you got your interviews passed, you would get phone calls from a bunch of different managers, and they'd kind of pitch you on their teams, and you decide which one is a good match. So I got three different calls from different teams at Docs. So they were the ones who were really growing. They were the ones who had all the headcount. So I ended up joining an Android team. So we were building doc sheets and slides for Android, doing performance optimizations there. So this is kind of funny. Doc sheets and slides actually embedded a copy of V8, the JavaScript engine, in the Android apps. So they built the whole library and shipped it as part of the app, and they ran all of the web JavaScript front end code in the Android apps. Just like the Java part of the Android apps was the kind of the UI Chrome, but all of the actual like app editor logic was in JavaScript. I started like kind of doing my old job again. Like I was optimizing the bindings between Java and JavaScript, like save optimized code, like get it to launch faster, like same types of stuff.
Did you, at some point, though, I have to imagine that you were bored with that. At some point, you're like, I've done this already. I know how this works. I want to do something different.
It was different. It was I was working on apps more than like the like low level code. I think I decided like that world wasn't really for me. Like I didn't really enjoy working on it that much. I also found like Docs as an organization was like kind of dysfunctional at the time. Like the managers were stretched way too thin. I think my manager had like 25 reports like on multiple teams. So it seemed like a career risk to stay there basically.
But it's such an important product.
Very much so.
I'll tell you, that product probably saved my mental health. And I'm going to tell you another little story. I don't remember. It must have been around 2000, and kids were all in school. So maybe it was like 2007 or 8. And I have 5 kids at the time. So I got basically 5 window laptops. And what do you think's happening to these laptops every week? I'm rebuilding them because they're getting a virus. Dude, I lost my mind one day, took one of the laptops and slammed it down on the floor. And the whole thing just went into pieces
Oh
because I
no.
just didn't want to repair another laptop ever again. And I went out and I bought 5 for like $200 each, 5 of those Chromebooks. And I brought them home, and the kids are crying. We can't play games. We can't do homework. I said, oh, no, you can do homework. There's Google Docs. There it is right there. You can't print PDFs. Yes, you can. Look. And that was it. I mean, I never had to repair another machine again after that. I mean, that product like saved my life. Maybe it saved my kid's life. I don't know.
It's such an important product, and I think it like that was it. Like especially the education aspect of it for me was like really compelling to work on. Like here we are, like we have 100 million users or like whatever they're up to now, and like so many of those are like kids in school like doing homework. This is making them more productive. This is helping them learn better. Like that's really important work, I think.
The collaboration features too. I won't work on a document with somebody if they don't throw it in Google Docs at this point. Just being able to hack on at the same time and interact. And you don't need a phone call. And you don't need Slack. You don't just even communicating while you're writing. I mean,
It's
really
it's
amazing
great to
features.
use. I haven't touched Microsoft Office in like 10 years because of Docs. Like I mean it doesn't have all the features, but it has all the features you need.
The only time I ever get a Word doc now is when I'm dealing with a lawyer. For whatever reason, they need to work in their these documents. Like, and the Mac will bring it up, and I'll convert it back for them. But I don't understand it, man. There's no collaboration in that back and forth of an email with a document in it. But lawyers, that's it. For whatever reason.
At least they're not making you like fax physical paper.
No, the government here makes me do that. I have to go to UPS every once in a while and fax. I got a letter one time that I must have changed the insurance on a car and I didn't report it. And they're telling me, we're going to revoke your license if you don't get us this document within like 3 days. Right. And I hadn't seen it. Now I'm like, but you can fax it to us right away if you want. But even if you fax it, you have no idea if somebody on the other end even like picked it up. And I'm just thinking, why not email at this point? Right. The Florida Department of Motor Vehicle, at least, is still using fax machines. That's wild. What do you decide you're going to do? Because one of the cool things about Google is there's so much going on there that I mean, I guess you do have opportunity to jump when there are open positions.
Yeah, that's something I really like about that company is like the ability to change what you're working on, like to follow new interests and develop new skills. I I was interested in getting back into compilers, so I like cast around and saw what was in New York, and it turned out like a big chunk of the Go team was there. I had never written any Go before. Didn't really know much about the language other than like small tutorials and like, oh, this is kind of interesting. But like I scheduled a meeting with Samir Ajmani, who's the manager. I guess he's a director now of all of Go. Like it was a great conversation with him. I talked with Alan Donovan, who's the author of the Go programming language. So he's been on the Go team for a long time, leading the tools and editor support effort back then. Just had great conversations with them both. So I switched over to that team. I was initially working on the build system support. So I was building Bazel support for Go, and this was like really in the early days of like Bazel open source. Go, I think was
What year is this? Like 2015, 2016?
This would be at the very beginning of 2017. I was on
Okay.
Docs for 2 years.
2017.
Yeah. We wanted to have we wanted to build Kubernetes with Bazel. Like Kubernetes had a fair amount of generated code. They had a bunch of protobufs, so they wanted to build everything with Bazel. And so we were building out support for that. This was actually part of a huge initiative within Google. This was right after the Alphabet reorganization, and they wanted to take all of like Google's developer stack and either open source it as is or kind of build open source replacements and move to those eventually, so that as they brought companies into Alphabet, like the Alphabet companies wouldn't have to rewrite their entire tech stack. Like they could use stuff that had been open sourced already. So like Bazel being open source was one of the things that was like kind of I don't want to say thrown over the wall. Like it was turned into an open source project, had long been an internal proprietary project. I think Kubernetes was like kind of in that same vein of thought. Like it was supposed to be something like Borg. Borg was in internal Google. Google never really adopted Kubernetes though internally. Like it was very much like a rewrite a second system. But a lot of those like early like Google Cloud projects, like I think Stackdriver was another one of them. A lot of those got like redeveloped as part of this initiative.
So, but from the Go team side of things, what was missing that you had to build to make all that possible?
Basically, all of the Bazel scripting part of this to actually like take a description of like what should be built as part of a program, like your binary, your library, like all your packages. We needed essentially a plugin to translate those into like compiler and linker commands for Go. So like the Go tool itself does this for like 99% of Go code out there. And the Go tool is actually like internally similar structure to Bazel. It has like kind of the same phases, the same kind of philosophy around like caching. So we were kind of like adapting Bazel to build Go among many other languages, but my job was Go.
I imagine, I don't know, I'm going to just say it. I imagine that project didn't take you a long time, a year, maybe less to get that done.
I think I was working on that primarily for a year. Another big chunk of that was actually like generating build files for Bazel. So Bazel needs a fair amount of configuration to get anything done, which it like feels natural for C++ if you're coming from make files and stuff. But for Go programmers, it feels very unnatural. You're used to the Go tool just figuring out everything for you. Like there are very strong conventions in the Go ecosystem. Like you have like package paths have to be a certain way. You have one package per directory. They can import things in such a way. So we had to like generate all that configuration automatically for Bazel. So I worked on a tool called Gazelle, and eventually made it to be like it's an open source tool, and now it's extensible to other languages. So a lot of people in the Bazel,
You wrote that in Go?
yeah, written in Go.
That was your first sort of Go programming right there?
I think it was my first like kind of self-contained Go project. Like there are definitely some things like going back to that and revisiting the code as I do now from time to time. Like there are some things that I would do really differently.
Of course, man, but that's called growth. Like if you don't look at that code and say I wouldn't change anything, I'd be a little, either you're done, it's time to move on to something else, or I'd be just sort of concerned,
For sure, yeah.
right? Yeah, I mean that's fair. I'm kind of curious what the next thing is that, well, like what's the next thing you get to start focusing on the Go team?
We had this big Go 2.0 initiative, and at the time in this was like mid 2018. The big chunk of work that needed to be done there was modules. Like modules were a massive reinvention of Go build tooling. Everything needed to be rewritten. The build system was completely different. Like we tried to keep the experience as close as possible to like the old Go pathway of doing things, but internally, like the build tool had to be rewritten. All of the editor support needed to be rewritten. It was just like almost a complete ground up rewrite of everything. I don't know how apparent that was on the outside, but it was the tools team in New York was very busy with that.
I can tell you from the outside. Well, first of all, I think modules saved Go. I think it's
Yes,
one of
I
the
agree
most
with that.
impressive engineering feats that I'd ever seen in terms of maintaining backwards compatibility even through the stages. And anybody who didn't have the patience for that, I didn't appreciate, because I knew the engineering effort had to be great, but from the user side of things, I thought it was ridiculously smooth. I think the only thing that hurt was the year of not having Go Please and the
Yes.
editor being very different. Like, your Go programming productivity went backwards for maybe a year. You had to really rely on what you knew. And then suddenly Go Please went full blown, like prime time again, and life got better. That's the only thing I would say. I think other than that, the work that was done there was like mind blowing.
That was a lot of continuous effort from some very talented people on that team. Like really impressed with everything they did on Go Please. It was rough in the early days, like everything is, but like they really turned it into something amazing. Like a very smooth experience now.
So you worked on the module stuff essentially. I mean, that was like 3 years of. I can only imagine it had to be 3 years of hell inside there,
It
just
was yeah, it
because.
was a really stressful
Yeah,
time.
but we're there now. I mean, you don't even think about the system anymore. And now with the ability of having the module file help with some tooling backwards compatibility, it's like better than ever.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm really happy with where we ended up on that. Um, like I would actually make a lot of the same like systematic structural recommendations to other systems. Like I made some recommendations in the early days of like Bazel's module system, and they took some ideas from Go, like the minimal version selection. I think that idea was a really key insight from Russ.
Like, let's talk about that for a couple minutes, because I think I'm going to say it this way. I think academically, it's really smart, right? If you want to make sure that your code can build properly, then leverage the versions that are being told work with, every module and every build. So the minimal version selection, I think, is brilliant there. And I think he's right. But I find myself always asking GoGet to upgrade everything to their latest greatest, and then just making sure that none of my tests break. I think I've been lucky that a build has never broken outside of, say, open telemetry for a year because they couldn't get their act together.
Oh my god, open telemetry. That's like the one example I have with like.
How not to do it. Um, but they got to 1.0, and I think they've only had one breaking change since. Uh, but I find myself, and maybe this is when I start saying I'm aging out, still just sort of saying, I just want to upgrade everything because I just feel like I can't tell you why, other than my gut says to do it. And I have the facility, so it's no big deal.
Man, I'm the opposite. I like just, finding a version that works and then just like never touching it again. I hate going through software updates. It's like I'm sitting down to watch TV and the TV is like, "Hey, I need to update." Like, why do we need to update? It's TV. And I think about like libraries that way too. It's like I have, a logging library or like a pattern matching library or something. I'm like, "Great, works. Never touch it again."
I do my upgrades twice a month, and I'm going to tell you why. Because if you don't, one day you're going to need to upgrade to something and you won't be able to, because you're so far behind that the stress in the code change that you have to make is much larger than it would have been if you had been updating every month.
That's
And
true.
so I'm always thinking about that. I have to be able to maintain, manage, and debug this going forward. And I've just gotten burned at least twice, um, with the other philosophy. So now, twice a month, I have a little make command with the go get, and I say update everything, and I hold my breath, and I pray that the tests work, and it happens. I happen with a hotel, but things not building. But you know what? I keep my vendor folder, and I can see what changed. And I don't know. I mean, that's my recommendation, just from an average developer sort of point of view.
There are definitely conflicting views on that. I think there was a lot of like debate and discussion about. I think it was called like writing the top or writing the bottom in the early days of modules, because there was a lot of debate over whether you should specify versions as like kind of a range, like maybe open ended on the top, and the tool would just like pick whatever the latest version was. A lot of tools did work that way. So anything that's using like kind of these constraint satisfaction algorithms are doing that. But there's some like huge disadvantages to doing that way. It means like your build can break if like some new version gets published without like any interaction from you. I think those version selection algorithms also tend to be NP complete, and they're very slow. So you end up like having to store the result in a lock file. So you have this extra thing hanging around, and if someone else like rebuilds the project and does it again, like it doesn't work anymore. So you hear those type of complaints all the time in like npm or Python ecosystems. Or I think like having like a static file that just has a purely deterministic output, not dependent on like any other events happening, is really important.
No, I love all the decisions and then the option. That one option. You want to just upgrade direct? You want to grab? That's on you. I'm an average developer. I just tell me tell me what to do and I'll do it. And just make me feel like I'm not going to get yelled at my boss when I say, "Well, I was told to do this by Google." Like you can't yell at me for that because it's Google, man. you know. I know it sounds silly because you were at Google, but that's how it works outside of Google, right? You just tell me what to do so I'm safe from any agony if something goes bad.
I think we were kind of self-aware of that. And we tried like, yeah, the funny thing is like anytime you build a platform, like the people who are building the platform don't really understand it, how to use it all that well. So when I was working on V8, I was like in C++ and assembly, and I knew the JavaScript spec really well, like language layer type stuff. But I didn't know anything about like actually writing JavaScript code in production. I didn't know like what are the popular libraries. I don't know how to write JavaScript tests or anything. And I think the same is true in like Go and modules. Like a large fraction of the Go team, like the people who work on compilers and runtimes, like don't really use modules ever because they're just working on the standard library. So they're not really in a position to say like what the best practices are. And like as like the team who was working on the Go tool itself and like defining what modules were, like we could kind of come up with some recommendations, but we actually didn't have that much real world experience with them. It was kind of a weird position to be in.
Well, I think the work that Brian Mills has done just being in Slack was huge. Once you have the Go team there that you can talk to, which is really huge. And he's so good at talking to people and working out the debates. I imagine that helped a lot back to the team.
That was really, really important in the early days. Like Brian and I were there in the modules channel in Slack. Like we heard like a lot of questions, a lot of complaints from people. I think like actually the most important thing that I did in my entire time on the Go team was to write documentation. So I wrote the module reference documentation. It's go.dev/ref/mod, and it's like 90 pages of dry like a specification basically for what modules are. And we wrote a bunch of other tutorials and things based on that. Like we had a couple different authors for blog posts. Like I helped outline and edit those. I think once we put out that documentation, like it was like the nature of the questions in the modules channel really changed. Like people were a lot more positive about the migration to modules. People understood what was going on. There was a lot more clarity. People were asking like deeper, more advanced questions, and people were actually like helping each other out. So there became like this community knowledge for any like listeners who are looking for lessons to take away. Like write documentation, practice your writing skills. I think it's the most important type of work, and it's something I think we all need to be good at. It was a huge change. It was really important.
Me being on the outside, I got a sense at some point after modules is really starting to like we've got a very good working system, right? And now COVID is sort of coming to an end in terms of what we all had to go through. A lot of people on the Go team were just completely burnt out. People don't realize how small the Go team is. I think at a peak, maybe you were 50 people with like 300 people worth of work, and you have 2 releases a year. So you got to be really, really careful what you're working on and really targeted. And I imagine everybody was after COVID and modules was completely burned out. You're one of those people that were just like, I need a break.
I was exhausted. So I was in New York for the worst of COVID. Um, I was fortunate to have a job where I could work inside and not go out too much. But I mean, it got pretty dark in New York for a long time. We had a tent hospital set up in the middle of Central Park. uh, just like weirdly quiet, like everyone gone, sirens all the time. So like there was like a lot of stressful external things happening, and at the same time, we're shipping modules. I think I was like working on 6 different projects at a time during like 2019, 2020. And it was too much. Like I was super overloaded. I was super burned out. Just so tired of that.
So at some point, you're like, the only way to escape is I got to do something completely different.
I tried about everything. This is when I started watercolor painting, which was like one of the more helpful things. But like I mean, the bigger changes like in 21, like after the vaccines came out, my wife and I moved back to San Diego. We like came out here. Her parents live here, and we actually found a house like a block away from them, which has been amazing to be really close to family.
Oh, yeah, because at that point you can work remote, right? I mean, Google is historically you have to be in the city with an office, and they have to lift that.
Google's been historically really strict about working in the office. They actually hadn't come out with a remote work policy yet, but I felt like they were going too soon, or they were going to call people back into the office soon. So I went out a bit on a limb and moved out here and figured like, if they come out with a remote work policy, then I'll do that. Otherwise, like I'll ask for an exception. Otherwise, I'll find a new job. Like I really wanted to be out of the city. I actually really like working remote, like as long as I have, big enough quiet space to work. Like I really like not being in, a loud open floor plan. Like there are some things about the office I miss, of course. Like I really miss going out to lunch with everyone, but on balance, I think remote work has been a good change.
I remember the one time I walked into that Chelsea office with Filippo. I remember seeing your desk in that room, right? You were in that like everybody else was out here, and you were in that room with, I don't know, maybe 4 other people tops or something.
That was the best situation. Like out of all of the Google Office, I think that was like one of the best places to be. Like we had this like shared office. I think it was kind of quieter when you were there, but normally it was like 9 people worked in there.
Oh, in that little room?
Yeah, in that little room. Like we had a shared office, like we were right above a cafe. We were on the top floor, so we had like a great view around. Like we were close to everything. Wasn't too loud. It's very, very nice.
No, I remember just seeing you and some empty desks in that room at the time I walked in. So I was like, man, they gave Jay his own office. What's going on here? No, I
Yeah,
wasn't
if only.
saying that, but um, that was a cool space. All right, so you're in San Diego and you're not working at Google anymore. So talk to me a little bit about and you're going and you went with a startup, I think you said, which is really wild because you go from enterprise to startup. So talk to me a little bit about now you decide you're going to leave Google and you find this opportunity.
Yeah, so I decided to leave Google a few months after I moved. So I was still burned out pretty hard, and I remember like I was losing a lot of sleep. Like I lost a ton of weight. Like I was having a bunch of health problems because of burnout. And I remember like I was cooking one night. Like I was chopping vegetables, just like prepping a meal, and just like an hour went by like that. Just like I looked at the clock and like an hour disappeared. Like I had blacked out. So like that was when I figured like, oh, okay, like I can't keep working anymore. Like I need to like take some time off and like really like focus on my health and heal. So I left in October and I took 8 months off sabbatical. It was an amazing time. Like anyone who's in that position to like take some time off and like focus on yourself, like it was so beneficial. I think it's the most important thing to do to like recover from burnout is like really just give yourself some space.
But were you able to do that financially because your wife is working and you're living a simpler life that isn't beyond say salary means, or you're able to save like I want people to hear how you're able to do that because I had 5 kids and now I have 7 my whole career. Like that was
Yeah.
never an option for me to just not work. For it was never an option for me. So I find it really interesting when people are able to do that. So maybe you can just share how you're able to put yourself in a position to be able to do that.
It's definitely a position of enormous privilege. Like I don't want to diminish that at all. We had like architect salaries, like senior engineer salaries from FANG companies coming in for a long time. And we had like for a long time, like really saved a lot of that. So we had like a big financial cushion that like financially, like it wasn't that bad for us for a while.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
For folks out there with kids, like I know like kids are expensive, and it's really hard to make that kind of to take that time off. But like if you can, it's really good if you're in a position to do so.
I try to tell my kids now, and it's very hard when you're first starting out. It's really hard, right? But try to live on 50% of your salary, 60% of your salary when you're starting. And as you get older and you make more money, try to bring that number down, not even. So maybe 10 years from now, you can get it down to 40%, right? Because you're making more money. You get it down to, you're living within a means. And it's a hard discipline. It took me a long time to learn that. And I'm finally there, right? It sounds like you at some level knew that already and you were capable of living within a certain percentage of salary coming in, not using all of it.
I think you've got to be really knowledgeable about, or it helps, I should say, to be knowledgeable about investing too, because like all that money you save, like if it's just sitting in a bank account, like inflation rots it away, right? And like the whole like decade, the 2010s, was an amazing time to invest in tech or the stock market in general. I was lucky to have a friend at Qualcomm who got me into investing really early. It's funny that this kid was like always looking for a good deal. He went home for a while to he was Singaporean, so he went home for 2 weeks to Singapore and like day traded the entire time on his vacation, and said like I made more money day trading than I did at my regular job at Qualcomm. Just like I was never willing to put in that much effort into it, but I mean, you invest in like index funds and you max out your 401k, and like it really puts you in a great position after a few years.
Dude, I day traded for like 3 years while I was working. Long story short, I hit I was always breaking even, right? You make $1,000 one week, you lose $1,000 the next. You have to hold. Anyway, long story short, I had held a stock for almost the entire time at $5, and I had like I don't even know, maybe 5,000 shares or something, maybe more. And overnight, the FDA approved their drug, and the stock went to 20 overnight, and I sold like half of it, and then it went to 50 and I sold the rest. I made like $80,000, and I said I'll never do this again. And I just put all the money in Edward Jones, and they essentially doubled it again in like 8 years or something like that. But once I hit that, I said I'll never do this again. I'm done.
It's what a rush though.
It was wild, man. I remember waking up that morning, having the TV on and waiting for the announcement, because there was all the FDA is going to decide tomorrow. The FDA is going to decide tomorrow. And sure enough, the FDA approved it. And that stock just went boom. And I was like, okay, but now you got to know how to sell. So yeah, at 20, I sold half of my shares, and then I just waited. And I think I got close to 50 for the other half or something. Or maybe it was like 35. I couldn't wait. And had gone, I probably was that. It was probably like 30 and I couldn't wait. And I saw it go as high as 50. Felt bad. And then, dude, within 6 months, it was back. Like all that was lost, right?
Yeah, it's scary though. If like that kind of thing is like a huge part of your portfolio, it's like I don't want to ever lose sleep over that stuff, you know?
No, so I wasn't day trading a lot of money. Maybe like 15 grand at any year. It wasn't a lot. It was, but I hear 100% what you're saying. You have to balance the money you're saving with investment to hedge the inflation and let the money work for you. You decide you burned out, you do your 8 months. Now you decide you're ready to go back into the workforce, and you start looking. So how do you find the company that you're at now? I'm assuming that's the company.
Yeah. So I was interested in working at a startup. Like I'd always been at these huge companies, and I kind of wanted to see like what is it like as an engineer, like still as an individual contributor, if you're in one of these really early stage places, like what can I contribute that really can like change or set the direction of the company. So I was looking for an opportunity like that. I had a bunch of friends at the time who were doing startups, like friends from Google and the Go team and elsewhere. And so I was very much interested in working with people that I knew well and trusted. Like I think that's really important because this is a huge financial decision. Like it's important for, trust the people who are running the company. Um, so I had a few interviews and it was a difficult choice, but I ended up going with this company EngFlow. The CEO is the person, Helen Altschuler, that I worked with in the early days on Go and Bazel and Kubernetes. And so like we had worked together directly for a long time, and like she like reached out to me and said like, hey, we're doing this company, like, would love to have you, and thought about it for a while. And it seemed like a really good fit. So here I am, 8 months later, like company's doing all right. I think it has a ton of potential. Um, like I really like, I never thought in my career that I'd be doing like a lot of build stuff, because it always seemed like important, but like, I don't know, not that fascinating. But since I've seen like all the stuff on the Go team, like the build is just like the foundation of everything. Like Go Please wouldn't work without being connected into the build tool and having a good understanding of the build system. Like that's why everything had to be rewritten with Go modules, is because we had completely changed the way packages were laid out and things got built. Like it's the foundation of so much developer tooling. So I think like as a company that's growing, like there's just like a ton of different things that we can do in that product space. Like it's the foundation of so many things.
There's an engineering principle that I teach, ever since I heard it. It was a deploy first mentality. If you're not able to deploy the software super early, then when you're ready to deploy it, you're not going to be able to. There will have been mistakes made. And so start a service that just logs hello and deploy that everywhere and get that pipeline and deployment pipeline running. I feel like that's what you're saying right now. That is the foundation of everything. Everything builds on it, and if you're making good or bad engineering choices early on too.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we have like our early product out there is like actually running the build remotely, but we also have like a UI, so you can see like which part of your build took a long time. And I think that like there's a ton of stuff that we can do there to like analyze, like how can we speed this up, or like, hey, this isn't tested very well. Like we can put code coverage in there. Like I one of the things I worked on in Go was fuzzing, so maybe like we can do fuzzing someday. Like that is another application of remote execution that we haven't even touched yet. There are absolute ton of things to do.
Is this an on-prem solution, or is it in the cloud where you're connecting on your private networks to access code repositories to do builds?
It's mostly in the cloud. Um, like the way we deploy, we call it co-managed. So like there are a couple options. Like we can fully manage like a remote execution cluster that's like isolated from all other customers, but we can also like deploy like a fresh cluster into our customer's AWS account or GCP account. So they have more control and more visibility into everything that's running there, and they can set their security settings the way they want. We do have a couple on-prem customers where like we don't have any visibility into that at all. That's a bit harder for us to support because we don't have that feedback loop of seeing like, oh, this isn't working as well as it should. So it's kind of like, you get someone on the phone and it's like, this isn't quite working right. Like can't see the logs, so try upgrading, I guess. Try resetting it. But it's definitely an area where we're looking at. We're kind of meeting customers where they are with that.
And the back end part of the stack is being written in Go?
Sadly, no. It's mostly in Java. We do have a few Go components, but like the core services are in Java.
So you're a Java developer. So you just went from the Go team and helping with all that to being a Java developer?
I try and wear many hats. I don't think of myself as like solely a Go developer. Like it was a huge part of my career, but I did C++, Java for a big part of it too.
I find that fascinating. I find that fascinating. You enjoy working in Java and what you're doing right now.
For sure, though, I like Go a lot better than Java. I'll say that
No. I'm not asking you to. I think it's totally cool. I think it's fair. It's totally fair. I did 10 years of C# and I looked at some code a couple of days ago and I didn't when I can't even remember writing it too. I don't think I could even jump back into that code. Like I've lost all my C sharp knowledge. You spend 10 years in something, you kind of lose it. I never did Java at all, but I don't think I even want to go back to writing an object oriented program again. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I get that. I feel like there are like the more interesting thing is like the business logic, like the concepts that are being expressed. And I mean, the syntax is like a big part of it. The language is a big part of it, but like at some level that is a little bit superficial. Like you're writing the same program, whether it's in Java or Go, like it looks very different, but the problem you're trying to solve is what's the really interesting, important thing.
I love that. Do you ever think that you're going to get back to some of your roots and get back into compilers and Zig? I want you to look at Zig, Jay. I think that's the next one right there.
Zig
You
is
probably
really
could use your
cool.
help.
I haven't written much code in Zig. Like I've read through some of the docs and done some of the tutorials. I think the ideas in Zig are fascinating. I think it's a really cool language.
Yeah, I haven't played with it really yet, but it's on my radar screen as I think the next language that we're going to start, only because it's popping in my feeds more. I have a recruiter friend who actually was asked to find a Zig developer. That's
Wow.
huge, right? Yeah. I mean, one job, but it's still like people are experimenting with it because languages come and go every week, but this one seems to have some stickiness to it. So at some point, I don't want to get to the point like I did with Go, where I'm blogging and teaching, and dude, I'm tired. Okay, everybody hears me on the show constantly say I'm tired. I don't want to learn another language. Um, but yeah, I think Zig is interesting.
Yeah, Zig's really cool. Like I like trying out new things. Like definitely professionally, I think it's good to always grow. Um, I'm excited that that's starting to be like a language that people are like looking for jobs in or like building careers out of. That's really like when you're designing something new, like a new platform, that's really the chasm to cross.
But at some point, I think we need a language called J. I think you should. You have this skill set, right? You're like Nielsen. What's his name? I have a special skill set. You know, you have this skill set, man. So I want to see a programming language named J, and I'll try it out.
Someday maybe.
You have no desire.
Someday.
You really have no desire to get back into like compiler stuff. You've done that. You're more interested now in the business problem.
I definitely would like to get back into it. I think the problem is like I am more interested on like the business side of things and like having impact and like really improving people's lives. I think like language design is like the most interesting set of problems for me. Like language design, runtime, garbage collector, like all that stuff is really fun to work on. But it's so hard to get from there to something that people are actually using. And like we have like a lot of languages already and like a lot of good ideas out there. Um, I I feel like there are shorter paths to having impact that I'm like more focused on right now.
All right, we're way out of time, but I still have to ask you two more questions. So I don't care at all that I've already taken like almost 2 hours of your time here. But I have to ask you this because you're on the Go team and you're a language sort of designer. Um, if you could, forgetting about backwards compatibility, what would you take out of the Go programming language, and what would you add if you could, if you had that power? And we don't care about backwards compatibility.
This is a question that like deserves a lot more thought than I'm about to give it.
No, it's okay. We're going to start a conversation. I'll tell you what I would take out after you tell me what you would take out.
Let me start with what I would add. I really miss like list comprehensions from other languages. Like
Yeah, what does that mean?
so like in Python, like you have a list comprehension where you can just say like I'm building an array, but instead of having like a for loop where you like append things onto an array like after some computation from another one, you can just have like an expression where it's like I plus one for I in range 10 or something.
Like link, like C
Exactly
sharp
like
had
link.
link.
Yeah.
Dude, boy, did I miss link when I switched to Go. I was lost, man.
Like I don't like having to write like a bunch of like loops and like if I have to like write another loop where I'm like getting all the keys out of a map and like sorting them and returning them again, like I hate doing that.
Link was powerful. Yeah. I really missed that. I felt like it didn't make sense in Go after some time, just because we don't really use those higher level data structures. But to be able to iterate and query and have that performant, that was mind blowing. Um, I used it a lot. I lived in Link when I was in C sharp. That's fair. Okay, that's fair. You don't know what you take out though.
What I would take out, like I think like the reason I like Go so much, it resonates me, is the minimalism. Like I think it's introduced somewhere as like radical minimalism. Like it's a language with very few features, and that really, really resonates with me. Like I don't want to have a lot of extra stuff. So if I were taking something out, it would be something that is like no longer used and is redundant and is like kind of holding back further development. But I'm having trouble actually thinking of anything in the language like that. Like there are a few packages in the library that like no one really uses. Like we could probably get rid of, but like,
All right, here's mine, Jay. Here's mine. You ready?
all right, let's hear it.
Here's mine. Naked returns.
Oh
Gone,
yeah. Yes.
gone, gone. I understand the need for the naming of the argument when you have a defer and you gotta pass something back up the call stack like an error, like you catch a panic and you so I get the naming of the return argument. I wish I could somehow limit it to just using those names in defers, but naked returns would be gone like first thing tomorrow.
Yeah, there's some
Gone.
safety things like that. I'd like it to be a bit more explicit. Like probably like struct literals where you don't specify the field names. Like those could go. That should always be explicit.
Okay, one last thing here because somehow it didn't come up again and it came up super early. So now I need you to tell the story of somehow lasers in New Mexico desert. I need this story before we sign off because it's been in the back of my head and it never popped up.
So this is my first internship out of like between high school and college. Like it was like one of these weird coincidences where I'd like bumped into someone at a dinner and they said, "Oh, what are you interested in?" Like engineering type stuff. Like here, I know someone who's looking for an intern. So I worked at this place called Hellstuff. They it was like kind of this like 1980s like Reagan era like Star Wars development. The idea was that they'd have this big laser that would shoot down missiles, and so they could actually um, they could actually hit like targets with it, like drones going like Mach 2 or something. So they did that type of stuff in the missile range. As an intern, I didn't really get to work on the lasers. My job was more like a file clerk type of thing. They're like, here's this closet. Please make a list of all the documents in here. But
Oh
when
my
they're doing a
God.
test, I sometimes got to like run the telemetry computers, and it was kind of cool seeing all this old tech in there. They recorded everything on tape, so they had these big like reel to reel tape machines, like these like 24-inch tapes, and so I mean, we talk about like mounting a file system, like the word mount came from like physically like mounting a tape on one of these drives and like threading the tape through the mechanism. So I got to do that. That was kind of fun. It's also where I learned a lot of like my bash scripting. I learned how to do that there.
But you didn't get to press the button that caused the laser to shoot, man. That's
No, they don't let the intern do that one. You
but
were saying
but
like a fence around the missile range. Like before I could get my ID badge there, I actually had to like go through a training of basically don't pick up strange metal objects in the desert, because there are a ton, like they used to test like cluster bombs out there, and so there are a ton of like unexploded little bomblets out there. I mean, if people once in a while go out for a hike and they touch something they shouldn't and get blown up, so you got to be careful out there.
well, I don't plan on being in the New Mexico desert anytime soon, but now I know not to touch anything
Yeah,
that
don't
looks
touch any
shiny.
strange metal objects.
I thought you were going to tell me they were radioactive. I didn't think you were going to tell me they were going to blow up.
The facility there was like a chemical laser, so like instead of having like fire drills and stuff, we had there would be like a hydrogen fluoride alarm that would go off. Hydrogen fluoride is really nasty stuff. You do not ever want to get it on you. It'll set your bones on fire. So I mean, occasionally there'd be like a little.
Dude, this is like weird science stuff. The chemical lasers and weird science, the movie Weird Science. Don't they produce like a chemical laser at the end that causes
It's been forever since I saw that one.
something, man. I remember him when the dry ice falls out of the refrigerator because he's so frustrated, and he's like, "We're gonna freeze the laser." I don't know. Or maybe it wasn't chemical, but yeah, new. When you're that young and you get to work on that kind of stuff, it's really, yeah, it can almost set the stage for this is what I want to do. I want to be in a lab like this. But you ended up not being in a lab like that. You ended up being at Google, and now,
Yeah, ended up doing a lot of other things, but I feel like I always want to be where the action is.
yeah, for sure. And you've got the experience and the education to be anywhere you want. So that's awesome.
Yeah, good
All right,
place to
dude.
be.
We are so out of time here, man. So thank you for hanging out as long as you did with us. The story is fascinating. I'm really glad we got to talk a little bit about your time on the Go team. So if anybody wants to just reach out to you after listening to the show, is there how can people do that? Where is the best place to reach out, talk to Jay?
I'm at jconrod on Twitter. I also have a blog at jconrod.com that I update occasionally with technical articles. That's about it. My email address is on both of those, I think, so I'm pretty easy to find.
So we will get that on the show notes. Did you had, yeah, I guess you had to get rid of your golang.org email too.
Yeah, sadly, no. I actually do have a golang.org email address. I haven't checked it in a long time though. I actually got that right before I left. I was always jconrod@google.com.
Right before you left, you finally got it, and you get to keep it.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to lock that down. So j at golang.org. But I won't check it. Don't email it.
Oh no, now you got to go look at it when we're done. I mean, who knows what's going on there, man? All right. This is Jay Conrod and Bill Kennedy signing off from the On Labs podcast. We hope to see everybody again real soon.